Catherine Monroe stood at the iron gates of Blackwood Ranch, her dress torn and stained with mud, her feet wrapped in cloth where her shoes had long since worn through. The mansion beyond rose up like some kind of castle, all white stone and gleaming windows under the harsh afternoon sun. She almost turned back right then and there. Her hand trembled on the cold, unforgiving metal. 3 long days without a scrap of food had left her weak, dizzy, a ghost of her former self. But then she heard it. Children's laughter, bright and innocent, floating from somewhere inside those impossible walls. Her hand went to her empty, aching stomach. She had to try. She had no other choice. She pushed the heavy gate open. The gravel driveway seemed to stretch on for a mile. Each step felt heavier than the last, a testament to her exhaustion. Catherine kept her eyes fixed on the ground, afraid to look too closely at the perfectly manicured garden, the flawless lawn, the kind of life she was never meant to have. She didn't belong in a place like this. Anyone with eyes could see that. But desperation has a funny way of pushing people right past their shame. The rancher himself answered the door. James Blackwood. She'd heard his name whispered in town, always with a mix of respect and a little bit of fear. Wealthiest man in 3 counties, they said. A widower, and father to twin daughters he couldn't seem to control. He stood tall and broad in the doorway, his dark hair just starting to gray at the temples, his eyes looking tired despite the expensive cut of his clothes. He studied her ruined dress, her hollow cheeks, her desperate eyes. Catherine braced herself, waiting for him to slam the door in her face. "I need work," Catherine said, her voice barely a whisper. "Anything. I can clean, cook, mind the children. I'm a hard worker. I won't cause you any trouble." James didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, his expression impossible to read. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was something else. Maybe recognition, like he saw something in her that everyone else had missed. "Come inside," he finally said, stepping back from the door. "Let's talk." The foyer took her breath away. Marble floors so clean you could see your reflection, a grand staircase sweeping upwards, and paintings on the walls that probably cost more than everything she had ever owned in her entire life. Catherine felt dirty, just standing there. She wrapped her arms around herself suddenly, painfully aware of how she must smell after days spent on the road. That's when she saw them. 2 identical little girls peering down from the top of the staircase. They couldn't have been more than 7 years old. They had wild dark curls that hadn't seen a brush in days, and matching defiant eyes. One of them had her dress on backwards. The other had a smudge of dirt streaked across her cheek. They stared down at Catherine with the kind of deep suspicion that only comes from being disappointed one too many times. "Sophie, Clara, come down and meet Miss Monroe," James called up to them. The girls didn't move. They just watched, silent and judging, waiting to see if this new stranger would be just like all the others who'd come and gone before her. James led Catherine into his study and gestured toward a plush leather chair. She sat right on the edge, afraid to lean back and soil the fine material. He poured her a glass of water, and she drank it down too fast, choking a little in her thirst. He waited patiently while she caught her breath, his gaze steady and unnerving. "I'm going to be honest with you," James said, sitting in the chair across from her. "I don't need another maid. I have 3 already. What I need is far more complicated than that." Catherine's heart sank. She had come all this way for nothing. "Those girls you saw," James continued, "they've had 5 nannies in the past 6 months. 5. Every single one of them quit because they said the children were impossible, wild, disrespectful, completely out of control." He paused, running a weary hand through his hair. "The truth is, they've been impossible since their mother died 2 years ago. And I can't blame them. They're grieving. They're angry. They feel abandoned." Catherine understood that feeling better than he could ever know. She had felt abandoned her whole life in one way or another. "The nannies tried to discipline them," James said. "Strict rules, punishments. It only made things worse. What Sophie and Clara need isn't someone to control them. They need someone who understands loss, someone patient, someone who might actually care. He looked directly at Catherine, his gaze intense. I heard about you in town. Heard you've been asking for work at every single house. The owner of the general store, she said you had kind eyes. Said you helped her carry her packages even though you looked half-starved yourself. Catherine hadn't realized anyone had noticed. She thought she was invisible. I'm offering you a position, James said. Not as a maid. As a companion to my daughters. Someone to help them heal. Room and board included. A generous salary. But I need to know you're serious. Those girls have had enough people walk away from them. Catherine's mind raced. This was more than she could have ever hoped for. A real room, regular meals, safety. At least, for a little while. But her chest tightened with a familiar, suffocating guilt. She couldn't tell him the truth. She couldn't explain that she was running, that staying anywhere for too long was dangerous, that the man hunting her would eventually find her no matter where she tried to hide. 1 month, Catherine heard herself say, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I'll give you 1 month. If it's not working out, we can part ways. 1 month. It would be enough time to rest, to eat, to plan her next move. Then she would disappear again, before the questions started. Before her past finally caught up with her. James studied her for a long moment. She could tell he heard what she wasn't saying, that she was temporary, that she had no intention of staying. But he must have been just as desperate as she was, because he nodded slowly. 1 month, he agreed. But Miss Monroe, if you start this and then leave after they've gotten attached to you, it'll hurt them more than if you had never come at all. Can you at least try? Really try? I promise, Catherine said. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. That first dinner was a complete and utter disaster. The girls refused to speak a single word to her. Sophie picked up her vegetables one by one and threw them on the floor. Clara deliberately knocked over her glass of milk, a defiant look in her eyes. They stared at Catherine with a cold challenge, waiting for her to yell, to punish them, to prove she was just like all the others. But Catherine didn't yell. She didn't scold. She just quietly cleaned up the mess and sat back down at the table. She ate her own meal slowly, savoring every single bite after days of gnawing hunger. The girls watched her, their expressions a mixture of confusion and suspicion at her lack of reaction. After dinner, Catherine was shown to her room. It was the nicest place she had ever slept in. A real bed with clean sheets, a window that overlooked the sprawling ranch, and a door that locked from the inside. She unpacked her small, pathetic bundle of belongings, her hands shaking. Hidden at the very bottom was the only thing of value she owned. A silver locket she could never sell, because it had been her mother's. And next to it, a folded newspaper clipping she kept as a constant, terrifying reminder of what she was running from. The headline read, Banker's son sought for questioning in embezzlement scandal. Thomas Whitmore, her husband, the man she'd fled in the middle of the night 6 months ago when she discovered his crimes, when she'd confronted him and seen the chilling rage in his eyes, the barely controlled violence simmering just beneath the surface. He hadn't hit her then. He never needed to. His words were enough. His control was enough. The way he'd slowly, methodically isolated her from everyone she knew. The way he'd made her feel like she was nothing without him. She'd run with just the clothes on her back, changed her name, moved from town to town, taking whatever work she could find, always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for the moment he would appear. Catherine hid the clipping again and tried to sleep. But at midnight, she heard it. A soft crying from down the hall. She followed the sound and found Clara sitting in the hallway, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, tears streaming down her small face. Mama used to sing to us, Clara whispered when she saw Catherine. Every night, but nobody sings anymore. Everybody leaves. Catherine's heart broke. She sat down on the floor beside the little girl, not touching her, just being there. After a moment, she began to hum. No words, just a soft, gentle melody her own mother had sung to her long ago. Clara's crying slowly subsided, her breathing evening out. Finally, she leaned her small head against Catherine's shoulder and fell asleep. From the shadows at the end of the hall, Sophie watched. Her sister looked peaceful for the first time in weeks. Maybe this stranger was different. And from his bedroom doorway, James watched too. Something shifted in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in 2 long years. Hope. Catherine carried the sleeping Clara back to her bed and tucked her in. When she returned to her own room, exhaustion finally pulled her under. She didn't know that in the town 20 miles away, a stranger had arrived that evening. A well-dressed man with cold, calculating eyes, asking the bartender if he'd seen a woman traveling alone, someone who might be using a different name, someone who might be hiding. The bartender had shaken his head at first, but then he remembered. "Now that you mention it," he'd said, "the sheriff mentioned something about a woman heading out toward the Blackwood Ranch. Looking for work, I think." The stranger had smiled, a chilling, predatory smile, and tipped his hat. Much obliged. Catherine slept peacefully that night, not knowing that Thomas Whitmore was closer than she had ever feared. That her 1 month of safety might not even last a week. That the family she was already beginning to care for was about to be caught right in the middle of her waking nightmare. The clock was ticking, and the morning would bring her one step closer to the moment when everything would fall apart. 1 week passed like a gentle thaw after a long, hard winter. Catherine woke each morning surprised to still be there. Surprised that the girls hadn't managed to drive her away yet. Small victories came in whispers and hesitant glances. On the 3rd day, Sophie brought Catherine her torn doll, the one she'd been hiding under her bed for months. She didn't ask for help, just left it on the kitchen table where Catherine was working. When Catherine returned an hour later, the doll was mended, its little dress carefully stitched. Sophie picked it up, ran her small fingers over the neat repair, and mumbled the smallest thank you before disappearing back upstairs. That night, it was Clara who knocked on Catherine's door. She asked her to tuck her in. Not the nanny, not the maid. Catherine. She requested the humming again, that wordless melody that somehow said everything that needed to be said. Catherine sat beside her bed and hummed until Clara's breathing went soft and even. When she stood to leave, she found Sophie standing in the doorway, watching with those careful, measuring eyes. The girl didn't say anything, but she didn't leave either. Progress came in these small, quiet moments. These tiny cracks in the armor both girls had built around their broken hearts. The mornings became Catherine's favorite time of day. She'd take the girls out to the garden after breakfast, teaching them about the different plants, telling them stories while they worked the soil together. Catherine was careful with her stories, always dancing around her real past, inventing a childhood that was happier and simpler than the truth. The girls didn't seem to notice. They just soaked up the attention like thirsty flowers turning toward the sun. Their laughter started coming more easily. The fighting between them grew less frequent. Even the servants noticed the change, whispering amongst themselves about the miracle worker who had somehow tamed the wild Blackwood girls in just 1 week. James watched it all from a distance. He'd catch glimpses of them through the windows as Catherine braided the girls' hair, or hear their giggles echoing from the kitchen where she was teaching them how to bake bread. One afternoon, he stood in the doorway of the kitchen and simply stared. His daughters were covered in flour from head to toe, laughing so hard they could barely stand, while Catherine showed them how to knead the dough. Sophie's smile was genuine. Clara's eyes were bright and clear. They looked like children again, not the angry, hurt little creatures they had become after their mother died. Something twisted in James's chest. His late wife had been a good woman, kind and proper. But had she ever been truly happy? He'd never really known for sure. She had played her role as the rancher's wife perfectly, but there had always been something distant in her eyes, something unreachable. He'd loved her, or at least he thought he had. But now he wondered if they'd both just been going through the motions of what a marriage was supposed to look like. The evenings became their time, his and Catherine's. After the girls were tucked into bed, they'd sit on the back porch with mugs of coffee and just talk. Real talk. The kind that stripped away all the pretense and got to the heart of things. One night, James told her about his wife's death. How she'd caught a fever during a sudden storm while he was away on business. How the girls had called for him, but he hadn't been there. How he'd arrived home to find her already gone, and his daughters looking at him like he had betrayed them. "She was good," James said, staring down into his coffee cup. "But I'm not sure she was happy here. I think she married me because it was what was expected of her. I think she stayed because leaving just wasn't an option. I gave her everything she could ever want, except for the one thing that really mattered." "What was that?" Catherine asked softly. "The freedom to choose," he said. "To choose her own life. To be more than just my wife and their mother." Catherine understood that more than he knew. "Sometimes good and happy are two very different things," she said quietly. James looked at her then. Really looked at her. "You know something about that, don't you? About not being free to choose." Catherine's hands tightened around her warm mug. He was getting too close to the truth. She couldn't tell him. "We all have our prisons," she said carefully. "You're running from something," James said. "It wasn't a question. I can see it in the way you watch the road, the way you flinch whenever a stranger comes to the door. Whatever it is, whoever it is, you don't have to face it alone." "Aren't we all running from something, Mr. Blackwood?" Catherine deflected, using his formal name like a shield. He let it go, but something had shifted between them. An unspoken understanding. An acknowledgement of the truths they both kept hidden. The storm came on a Tuesday, rolling in fast and violent from the north. Dark clouds swallowed the sun by mid-afternoon. The wind howled around the house, rattling the windows and bending the trees. Rain hammered against the roof like a volley of bullets. The girls were terrified. Sophie tried to hide it with a show of bravado, but Catherine could see her hands shaking. Clara clung to Catherine immediately, whimpering about the night their mama died. "It was a storm just like this," Sophie whispered, her defiance finally crumbling. "Papa wasn't home. Mama got sick. She called for him, but he didn't come." The words hit James like a physical blow. He'd been standing in the doorway, but now he seemed to shrink, his face going pale. The guilt he carried wasn't just in his own imagination. His daughters blamed him. Of course they did. Catherine made a decision in a heartbeat. "Come on," she said, gathering both girls into her arms. "We're going to have an adventure. We'll build a camp in the living room, tell stories, and pretend we're explorers in a cave, waiting out a dragon attack." She spent the next hour turning their terror into a game. She built a fort from blankets and chairs. She lit candles when the power flickered and went out. She told wild tales of brave knights and clever princesses who outsmarted fearsome monsters. The girls slowly began to relax, caught up in the magic of the stories. The raging storm outside became just background noise to the sound of Catherine's voice. The storm lasted for 3 days. 3 days trapped inside while the wind and rain battered the ranch. 3 days where Catherine kept the girls occupied and calm, where she transformed their terror into an adventure. James watched her work a kind of magic he'd never been able to manage with his own children. She didn't dismiss their fears. She didn't tell them to be brave. She just sat with them in their fear, and made it smaller by simply being there. On the second night, after the girls had finally fallen asleep in their blanket fort, James sat alone in his study with a bottle of whiskey. Catherine found him there near midnight, slumped in his chair, a glass in his hand, staring at nothing. "They don't blame you for her death," Catherine said from the doorway. "They should," James said without looking up. "I wasn't there. I'm never there when it matters. I was too busy building this empire, making money, securing their future, and I missed everything that mattered. I missed my wife dying. I missed my daughters' hearts breaking." Catherine walked into the room, gently took the glass from his hand, and set it aside. "You're here now. That's what matters." "Is it?" James looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "Is being here now enough to make up for all the times I wasn't?" "I don't know," Catherine said honestly. "But it's a start. And those girls, they need you to try. They need you to be present, even if you weren't before." Like you're trying, James asked quietly. Even though you're planning to leave. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and sharp. Catherine had no answer. The power chose that exact moment to go out completely. Darkness swallowed the room. Catherine stumbled in the sudden blackness, and James was there in an instant, catching her by the arms. They were close, so close she could feel his breath on her face, could smell the whiskey and something else, something uniquely him. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Why did you really take this job?" James whispered. "No one comes to the middle of nowhere without a reason." "I needed somewhere no one would find me," Catherine said, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. "Who's looking for you?" "Someone I can't face. Someone I'm not strong enough to face." James's hands were still on her arms, steady and warm. "Then don't face them alone." Catherine pulled away, the moment breaking like fragile glass. "You don't understand what you're offering," she said, her voice shaking. She fled to her room before he could respond, before she could make promises she knew she couldn't keep. The next morning, the storm had passed. Weak sunlight filtered through the windows. The girls woke up refreshed and happy, their fear forgotten. They begged Catherine to help them make breakfast, and together they created a glorious mess of pancakes and syrup that had everyone laughing. Sophie and Clara sat at the kitchen table, and Clara pulled out her box of crayons. "I want to draw our family," she announced. Catherine's breath caught in her throat, but she said nothing. She watched as Clara carefully drew 4 stick figures: a tall man, 2 small girls with curly hair, and a woman standing in the middle, holding both of the girls' hands. Above the drawing, Clara wrote in her careful child's handwriting, "The Blackwood family." Sophie looked at it and nodded her approval. "That's us," she said simply. "Now we're a real family." Catherine's heart both shattered and soared at the same time. She wanted to tell them not to get attached, that she would be leaving soon, that she couldn't be their family. But the words wouldn't come out, because some hungry, desperate part of her wanted it to be true. That afternoon, while the girls were napping, James's ranch foreman rode up to the house. Catherine was in the garden, trying to work off the anxiety that had been building in her chest all day long. She saw the 2 men talking, saw James's face go serious. Then both of them looked directly toward her. Her blood ran cold. James walked over to her slowly. "Catherine, Bill says there's been a stranger in town asking questions." The world tilted on its axis. "What kind of questions?" "About new arrivals, about women traveling alone. He was well dressed, Bill said, a city type. Said he was looking for his wife." Catherine couldn't breathe. Thomas. He had found her. After 6 long months of running, of hiding, of constantly looking over her shoulder, he had finally caught up to her. "You know who it is," James said. It wasn't a question. Catherine could only nod, unable to speak. "Then we'll deal with it," James said firmly. "You're under my protection now." "You don't understand," Catherine whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't protect me from him. No one can." That night, while everyone else slept, Catherine packed her small bundle again. She moved silently through her room, gathering the few things she owned. The silver locket, the worn newspaper clipping, the memories of one perfect week, where she had almost felt human again. She would leave before dawn, disappear before Thomas could find her here, before he could hurt these people who had shown her nothing but kindness. She was just tying up her bundle when she heard it. Footsteps in the hall. James stood in her doorway, his eyes taking in the packed bag, the look of resolution on her face. "Don't," he said simply. "I have to. If he finds me here, if he makes a scene, it will ruin you. The girls have been through enough." "So have you," James said. "And I'm not letting you run anymore." Before Catherine could argue, before she could try to explain why staying was impossible, they heard it. The sound of hoofbeats on the gravel driveway. At this hour, near midnight, no one came to Blackwood Ranch unless they were bringing trouble. James and Catherine rushed to the window. A lone rider was approaching in the moonlight. Even from a distance, even in the shadows, Catherine knew that silhouette. The way he sat in the saddle, the arrogant tilt of his head, the confidence of a man who always got what he wanted. Thomas Whitmore had arrived. Catherine's knees went weak. "He's here," she whispered. "God help me. He's here." Catherine couldn't move. She stood frozen at the window, watching Thomas Whitmore dismount from his horse with the casual confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his entire life. He straightened his expensive city coat, looked up at the house as if he already owned it, and started walking toward the front door. "Stay here," James said, his voice hard as steel. "Let me handle this." "You don't understand what he's like," Catherine whispered, her voice frantic. "He'll twist everything. He'll make you believe I'm the problem." "Then you'll tell me the truth after," James said. "But right now, you stay out of sight." Catherine nodded and stepped back from the window, her whole body shaking uncontrollably. She could hear James's heavy footsteps going down the stairs, heard the loud, demanding knock on the front door, heard it swing open. Then Thomas's voice, smooth as silk and just as dangerous. "Good evening. I apologize for the late hour. My name is Thomas Whitmore, and I'm looking for my wife." Catherine crept to the top of the stairs where she could hear but not be seen. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break right through her ribs. "Your wife?" James's voice was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "Yes, Catherine Whitmore. She's been unwell, you see. She left home several months ago during a rather difficult episode. I've been searching for her ever since." Thomas's voice carried the perfect mixture of practiced concern and utter exhaustion. "I was told in town that a woman matching her description came to work here. I do hope it's her. I've been so terribly worried." The lie was so smooth, so well rehearsed. Catherine had heard him use that exact same tone with his business partners, with the police, with anyone who ever dared to question him. He was a master at playing the role of the concerned, reasonable man. "There's a woman working here," James said slowly, "but she never mentioned a husband." "No, she wouldn't," Thomas said with a sad, theatrical sigh. "It's part of her condition, I'm afraid. She becomes confused, creates new identities for herself, tells these elaborate, fanciful stories. The doctors say it's a complete break from reality, brought on by some past trauma. Here, I have documentation." Catherine knew exactly what he was showing James. The forged medical papers, the marriage certificate, the carefully constructed web of lies that painted her as mentally unstable, as someone whose word couldn't be trusted. "I appreciate your care for her," Thomas continued, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "But she needs proper medical attention. She needs to come home where I can look after her." "Perhaps we should ask the lady herself what she wants," James said, his voice still level. Thomas's voice hardened just slightly, the first crack in his perfect facade. "With all due respect, Mr. Blackwood, she is my wife. Legally, she doesn't have a choice." Catherine couldn't hide any longer. She walked down the stairs, each step feeling like she was walking to her own execution. When Thomas saw her, his face transformed into a mask of perfect concern, but his eyes promised a world of violence later. She knew that look. She'd seen it the night she ran. "Catherine, darling," he said, moving toward her with his arms outstretched. "Thank God. I've been so worried." "Don't touch me," Catherine said, her voice stronger than she felt. Thomas stopped, but he smiled as if she had just proven his point for him. "You see, Mr. Blackwood, the paranoia, the fear of the people who love her the most, it's truly heartbreaking." "I'm not paranoid," Catherine said, "and you don't love me. You never did. Sweetheart, please, let's just go home and we can work through all of this with your doctors." "I am not going anywhere with you." Thomas's mask slipped for just a second. "You're my wife. You'll do as you're told." That's when the girls appeared at the top of the stairs. They must have been woken up by the noise. Sophie and Clara stood there in their nightgowns, their eyes wide and frightened. "She's not leaving!" Sophie shouted down. "She's ours!" Thomas looked up at them with cold, dismissive calculation. "Children, I understand you've grown fond of your governess, but she belongs with her family." "She is our family!" Clara cried, her voice choked with tears. James stepped between Thomas and the stairs, a silent, imposing barrier. "I think you should leave. Come back tomorrow with the proper authorities if you must, but right now, you are frightening the children." I'm frightening them? Thomas's voice rose, laced with indignation. Your hired help is a mentally unstable woman who abandoned her husband and her responsibilities, and you've let her around your children unsupervised. Get out, James said quietly. The words carried more threat than any shout ever could. Thomas stared at him for a long, tense moment, then smiled that cold, calculated smile again. Very well, but I will return tomorrow, with the sheriff. And Catherine, darling, you will be coming home with me, one way or another. He turned and walked out, but his threat hung in the air like thick, choking smoke. Catherine watched him ride away, knowing this wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The moment the door closed, her knees gave out. James caught her just before she hit the floor. The girls ran down the stairs, both of them wrapping their arms around her, sobbing. We won't let him take you, Sophie said fiercely. Tell her, Papa. Tell her she doesn't have to go. James looked at Catherine, his jaw set with grim determination. Tell me everything. The truth this time. So she did. Sitting there on the floor with the girls clinging to her and James listening intently, Catherine told them all of it. The marriage to Thomas, the control, the isolation, the discovery of his embezzlement, the threats, the escape, the long months of running and hiding. When she finally finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then James said something that changed everything. Marry me. Catherine stared at him, bewildered. What? Marry me. If you're my wife, you're under my legal protection. We can fight his claim. File for an annulment of your first marriage. And in the meantime, he can't touch you. You can't do that, Catherine whispered. Your reputation, the girls, everything you've built. My girls need you, James said simply. And I'm not going to let him take you. Sophie and Clara looked between the two adults, hardly daring to breathe. Marry him, Catherine, Sophie begged. Please, then you'll be our real mama, and nobody can ever take you away. Catherine looked at their desperate, tear-streaked faces, at James's determined expression, at the life she so desperately wanted but never thought she could have. And she made her choice. Yes, she whispered. I'll marry you. There was no time to waste. James sent his foreman to fetch his lawyer friend before the sun was even up. The man arrived within the hour, sleepy but instantly alert when he heard the situation. He spread legal papers across the dining room table, while Catherine paced nervously, and the girls sat watching, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. It's risky, the lawyer said, adjusting his spectacles. As her legal husband, Thomas has rights. But if we marry you two immediately, and file for an annulment of the first marriage based on duress and abandonment, we can at least delay him. Buy us time to build a case against him. How much time? James asked. Depends on how hard he fights. Could be weeks, could be months. Then we do it now, James said decisively. Before he comes back with the sheriff. The lawyer nodded. I'll prepare the documents. We can have the ceremony at dawn in your private chapel. Keep it simple and fast. Sophie jumped up. Mama Catherine needs a dress. She can't get married in that old thing. The word mama hung in the air. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Clara took her hand and squeezed it tight. Come on, Sophie said, pulling Catherine toward the stairs. We'll find you something pretty. In the late Mrs. Blackwood's closet, the girls found a simple white dress. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. Catherine held it against herself, feeling a strange sense of unease wearing a dead woman's clothes to marry her husband. But there was no time for new dresses or second thoughts. She'd want you to have it, Clara said quietly, as if reading her mind. She'd want Papa to be happy again. The girls helped Catherine get ready, brushing her hair and weaving wildflowers they'd picked from the garden into it. For a moment, Catherine forgot that this was a marriage of convenience, a desperate legal strategy. For a moment, she let herself imagine that this was real. Dawn came, soft and golden. In the small chapel on the ranch property, they gathered. Just James, Catherine, the girls, the lawyer, and the local priest who'd been roused from his sleep with promises of a generous payment for his discretion. Sophie and Clara wore their best dresses, carrying bouquets of wildflowers and grinning with barely contained excitement. The priest opened his Bible. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The chapel doors burst open. Thomas Whitmore stood in the doorway, the sheriff and 2 deputies flanking him. "Stop this farce immediately." The sheriff looked apologetic but firm. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm afraid this woman is already married. This ceremony cannot continue." Thomas walked down the aisle like he owned the place. "She is my wife. This is bigamy, and you know it." The lawyer stepped forward. "We have filed for an annulment of the previous marriage based on—" "Filed is not granted," Thomas interrupted, his voice sharp. "She is still legally mine." He looked at the sheriff. "Arrest her for attempted bigamy. Arrest him for aiding and abetting her." The girls screamed. Sophie grabbed onto Catherine's arm. Clara wrapped herself around James's leg. Both of them were crying, desperate and terrified. "You can't take her," Sophie shouted. The sheriff moved forward reluctantly. "I'm sorry, Miss Monroe, but—" "Her name is Whitmore," Thomas corrected coldly. "And she's coming with me." James stepped between them. "Then arrest me too. Charge me with whatever you want. But you are not taking her without a fight." "Gladly," Thomas said, his mask of civility completely gone now. "You have interfered with my marriage, turned my wife against me, and now you're trying to steal her with some pathetic legal trick." "Maybe because she's terrified of you," James shot back. "Maybe because she ran for her life." Thomas grabbed Catherine's arm, yanking her hard toward him. "She ran because she's unstable. She needs help. My help!" The violence in his grip was undeniable. Catherine cried out in pain. That's when James lost control. He lunged forward and pulled Thomas off of her. For a moment, the 2 men struggled, a chaotic tangle of limbs. The ranch hands who had been waiting outside rushed in. Thomas was pulled back, shouting threats and obscenities. "Stop!" The sheriff's voice boomed, cutting through the chaos. "Everyone, stop right now!" He had been watching Thomas carefully, watching the way he grabbed Catherine, watching the pure, unadulterated rage in his eyes. The sheriff had been in law enforcement long enough to recognize a dangerous man when he saw one. "Mr. Whitmore," the sheriff said slowly, "a funny thing happened this morning. I got a telegram from the marshals in Denver. Bank examiners are asking about you, something about missing funds and falsified records." Thomas went very still. "That's absurd." "Is it?" The sheriff pulled the folded telegram from his pocket. "Says here they've been looking for you for 3 months. Says you fled the city just before they could bring charges." He looked at Catherine. "Is that what you were running from, ma'am? His crimes?" Catherine nodded, finally finding her voice. "He stole from the bank. When I discovered it and confronted him, he threatened me. I ran because I was afraid. Afraid of what he would do to keep me quiet." "She's lying!" Thomas shouted, but the desperation in his voice betrayed him. The sheriff made his decision. "Thomas Whitmore, you're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud. And from what I just saw, we'll add assault to that list." "This is ridiculous." Thomas struggled as the deputies moved toward him. "She's my wife. You can't do this." "Actually," the lawyer spoke up, a triumphant look on his face, "given that you are now a wanted criminal who fled prosecution, I believe we have more than enough grounds for an immediate annulment. A marriage obtained through deception and maintained through intimidation is no marriage at all." Thomas was dragged away, still shouting threats, still promising he would come back, still trying to maintain control even as it slipped through his fingers. Catherine watched him go, her whole body shaking with relief. She couldn't quite believe it was finally over. The chapel fell silent. The priest cleared his throat. "Well, shall we continue?" Catherine turned to James. She was free now, truly free. He didn't have to marry her. This could all end right here. "You don't have to do this anymore," she whispered. "I'm safe now." James took her hands in his. Then, to everyone's surprise, he got down on one knee, right there in front of the altar. "Catherine Monroe," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm not asking you because you need protection. I'm asking you because in 1 week you brought life back into this house. You made my daughters laugh again. You made me feel again." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm asking because I love you. Will you marry me?" Sophie and Clara held their breath. The whole room waited. Catherine looked down at this man who had offered her everything without asking for anything in return. This man who had fought for her, and at these girls who had called her mama. This family that had somehow, against all odds, become hers. "Yes," she said, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." The ceremony was completed with everyone crying happy tears. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Catherine like she was the most precious thing in the world. The girls rushed forward, and they all held each other in a tight embrace. A real family at last. Outside the chapel, the morning sun rose, bright and clear. Thomas was gone. The threat was over, and Catherine finally could stop running. The first week of marriage was strange. Catherine had gone from being a hired companion on the run to being Mrs. Blackwood, mistress of the ranch, and mother to 2 girls who called her Mama, without a second thought. But between her and James, there was an awkwardness, a distance neither of them quite knew how to bridge. They had married in a crisis. Now they had to figure out how to actually be married. James insisted Catherine take the master bedroom while he moved into a guest room down the hall. "No pressure," he had said. "We'll take our time. Figure this out as we go." Catherine was grateful for his patience, but she also felt a pang of guilt. He had given her everything: his name, his protection, his home, and asked for nothing in return. Some nights, she would lie awake in the massive bed, wondering if she had trapped him in a marriage he didn't really want, wondering if his proposal had been more about protecting her than actually loving her. The nightmares came in the darkest hours of the night. Catherine would wake up gasping for air, seeing Thomas's face, feeling his hand on her arm, yanking her, controlling her. The first time it happened, she tried to muffle her cries in her pillow. But James heard. He appeared in her doorway, his face etched with concern. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the chair beside her bed. She nodded, too shaken to speak. He sat with her until her breathing calmed, talking quietly about nothing important. The weather, the ranch, a funny thing one of the horses did. Just his steady presence made the fear smaller, less powerful. After that, it became their unspoken routine. When the nightmares came, James would sit with her until dawn broke. The girls adjusted to their new reality faster than the adults. Sophie and Clara were ecstatic to officially have a mother again, but even they had their moments of fear. One morning, Sophie tested Catherine at the breakfast table. "You can't leave us now," she said with a forced casualness. "You're married to Papa. You're stuck here." Catherine set down her coffee cup and looked Sophie straight in the eye. "I am not here because I am stuck. I am here because I choose to be. Every single day I wake up and I choose you and your sister and your father." "But what if you stop choosing us?" Clara asked quietly, voicing the real fear that lay underneath Sophie's bravado. Catherine pulled both girls into a tight hug. Loving someone isn't just a feeling that comes and goes. It's a choice you make over and over again, and I choose you too. Always. The town had mixed reactions to the hasty marriage. Some whispered that the rich rancher had foolishly married his servant. Others gossiped that the woman with the mysterious past had trapped him. But when the full story came out, when people learned she had been fleeing an abusive criminal, the tone began to shift. The women of the town especially understood. Several came to visit, bringing pies and welcome gifts, some even sharing their own stories of difficult marriages and hard choices. Mrs. Henderson from the general store arrived one afternoon with a basket of preserves. "I was wrong about you," she said simply. "I judged too quickly. You're exactly what this family needed." Catherine accepted the apology with grace, understanding that small towns ran on gossip, but they also ran on a grudging respect for those who managed to survive. 1 month after the wedding, James found Catherine in the garden. She was teaching the girls how to plant vegetables for the fall harvest. The afternoon sun caught in her hair, and she was laughing at something Sophie had said. James stood watching her, his heart doing something strange and unfamiliar in his chest. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Catherine found him on the back porch. The stars were out, bright and clear. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I've been thinking," Catherine said carefully. "About us. About this marriage." James tensed, afraid she was about to say she wanted to leave, that the arrangement was over. "I don't know how to be a wife," she continued, her voice soft. "My first marriage wasn't real. It was a prison. I don't have any good examples to follow." "Then we'll make our own rules," James said. "No one else's marriage has to look like ours." Catherine turned to face him. "I need you to know something. I didn't just say yes in that chapel to save myself. I said yes because somewhere between that first night and now, this became real for me. You became real. The girls became real. This family. It became everything." James reached for her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. "I need you to know something too. I didn't propose just to protect you. I proposed because you woke me up. For 2 years, I was just going through the motions of living. And then you showed up at my door, torn and starving, and you reminded me what it felt like to actually live." "So what now?" Catherine asked, her heart beating fast. "Now, we stop being so careful," James said. "We stop treating this like it might break. We are married. Let's actually be married." Catherine smiled, a real, radiant smile. And for the first time since their wedding, she leaned in and kissed him. Not the ceremonial kiss at the altar, but a real kiss. A choice. A beginning. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying a little. James stood up and offered her his hand. "Come on. Let's go to bed. Our bed." Catherine took his hand and let him lead her inside. That night, for the first time, she slept in the master bedroom with her husband beside her. And for the first time in a very long time, no nightmares came. There was only peace. 3 months passed. Fall arrived, painting the landscape in shades of gold and rust. The girls started school in town, thriving with their newfound confidence. Catherine ran the household with a quiet, steady efficiency, earning the respect of the staff and the entire community. She and James grew closer each day, learning each other in the small, intimate moments of life. How he took his coffee, how she hummed while she worked, the way they could find each other's eyes across a crowded room and share a secret smile. One evening in late October, Catherine called a family meeting at the dinner table. The girls looked worried, always afraid that the good things in their life wouldn't last. James squeezed her hand under the table, a silent show of support. "I have some news," Catherine said, her voice shaking just a little. "Something wonderful." She looked at her daughters. "Next spring, you're going to be big sisters." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Sophie shrieked with joy. Clara burst into happy tears. They both jumped up and threw their arms around Catherine, talking over each other with breathless excitement. "A baby? A real baby? Will it be a boy or a girl? Can we help pick the name?" James pulled Catherine into his arms, his own eyes wet with tears. "Are you sure?" he whispered into her hair. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday," Catherine said, laughing through her own tears. "We're going to have a baby." That night, with the girls finally asleep after hours of excited planning, James and Catherine stood on the porch together, looking out at their land. The ranch stretched out before them in the moonlight, solid and real and theirs. "A year ago I was alone and terrified," Catherine said softly. "I thought my life was over." "And now?" James asked. "Now I have everything I never even knew I needed. A home, 2 beautiful daughters, a husband I actually love, and a baby on the way." She turned to him. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," James said. "The day you knocked on my door." They stood together in a comfortable silence, 2 people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, 2 people who had built something real and beautiful, from the most desperate of beginnings. The future stretched ahead of them, full of promise and possibility. And Catherine, finally, truly believed she deserved every bit of it. Christmas came to Blackwood Ranch with a blanket of snow and a deep, abiding warmth. The house glowed with candles and pine garlands. Catherine stood in the kitchen making cookies with the girls, her belly round with 6 months of pregnancy. She caught her reflection in the dark window pane and barely recognized herself. The hollow-cheeked, desperate woman who had arrived just a year ago was gone forever. In her place stood someone confident, loved, and finally deeply at peace. "Mama, you're burning the cookies!" Sophie laughed, pulling a tray from the oven just in time. Catherine smiled at the word "mama." It still made her heart feel full every single time she heard it. That evening, the whole family decorated the enormous Christmas tree together. James lifted the girls one at a time to place ornaments on the highest branches. Clara hung a special one she had made at school, a wooden ornament painted with careful letters that spelled out the Blackwood family: James, Catherine, Sophie, Clara, and baby. "Now we're all here," Clara said with deep satisfaction. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Last Christmas, I was alone and starving. I didn't think I would survive the winter." James wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Last Christmas, we were just going through the motions. You taught us how to really live again." On Christmas morning, after all the presents were opened and wrapping paper littered the floor, James pulled Catherine aside. "There's one more gift," he said, handing her a thick envelope. Inside was a letter. Catherine recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from her sister, the one she'd lost touch with during her marriage to Thomas, the sister who had believed his lies about Catherine being unstable. "She found us through the newspaper wedding announcements," James explained. "She wants to reconnect. She says she's sorry she didn't believe you. I wrote back and invited her to visit in the spring." Catherine couldn't speak through her tears. Family restored. Family expanded. Everything she thought she had lost was being found again. The girls ran back into the room, demanding attention. "Can we go play in the snow?" "Bundle up first," Catherine said automatically, already moving to help them with their coats and scarves. James watched his wife mother his daughters with such natural, easy grace. He watched her laugh when Sophie threw a snowball that missed spectacularly. He watched her carefully help Clara build a snowman, despite her pregnant belly making it difficult to bend down. This was his family, complete and real. His. That night, after the girls had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from their play, James and Catherine sat on their porch wrapped in heavy blankets. Snow fell softly all around them, covering the ranch in a fresh, clean white. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked suddenly. "Picking up a stranger from your doorstep? Marrying someone you barely knew?" James pulled her closer. "Every single day." Catherine's face fell until she saw the grin spreading across his face. "I regret not doing it sooner," he continued. "I regret not kissing you that first week. I regret every single moment before you came into our lives." Catherine laughed and playfully hit his arm. "You scared me for a second. Good. Keeps things interesting." He placed his hand on her belly, feeling their baby kick. "What are you thinking about?" "About how I came here in rags, just asking for work. How I planned to stay for 1 month and then disappear. How I thought I didn't deserve good things." She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the soft light from the house. "And how wrong I was about everything." "Not everything," James said. "You were right about one thing." "What's that?" "That you needed somewhere no one would find you. You needed somewhere safe." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "You just didn't know you were coming home." Catherine rested her head on his shoulder, watching the snow fall on their land, their home, their future. Inside, their daughters slept peacefully. In her belly, their baby kicked, strong and healthy. Beside her, her husband held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. She had arrived desperate and broken, expecting nothing, feeling she deserved even less. But in this place, she had found everything. A man who saw past her rags to her heart. Daughters who taught her that family wasn't about blood, but about choice. A home she chose that had chosen her right back. "I love you," she whispered into the quiet night. "I love you too," James replied. "Forever." Forever. Catherine echoed. And for the first time in her life, she finally believed it. The running was over. The fear was gone. She was Catherine Blackwood, a wife and a mother, loved and safe. She was home. The snow continued to fall, soft and steady, covering everything in a new, pure white. Inside the warm house, the fire crackled in the hearth. Tomorrow would bring more laughter, more life, more love. But tonight, this single moment, was perfect. Catherine closed her eyes and breathed in the cold, clean air, the scent of wood smoke, and the promise of everything good still to come. She had come here asking for a job. He had asked her to be a mother. But she had become so much more. She had become herself, the woman she was always meant to be. As the clock struck midnight on Christmas, as one year ended and another began, Catherine Blackwood made a silent promise: to never take this gift for granted, to choose this family every single day, to love fiercely and without fear, and to be present for every single moment. She had been given a second chance at life, and she intended to live every second of it. It was the end of her old story, and the beginning of forever. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.